I thought I'd show you how to do a concealed zip today because there's lots of little tips. Invisible zip, concealed zip. This is my invisible zip sample. You probably can't see it, and that's what it should be like. You can't see it. So that's the invisible zip, and it should run straight into the seam below it, so you can't see where the zip finishes and the seam starts. And also I put a little facing on the top here, so I was going to show you how to do a neat way of doing that as well. Whenever you're putting a zip into a garment, always stabilise the area where... Oh, there's a tripod coming.
Well, yeah, we were just moving.
Always stabilise the area where the zip's going to go. So I use strips of woven interfacing. I also have a basket of these strips ready cut, so that when I'm going to put a zip in, these are ready cut. So stabilise both pieces of fabric with a piece of interfacing. And then I neaten the edges, and I've done that on the overlocker. And you're going to be tacking the seam, and I tack by hand, so I've got my normal tacking thread. Oh, that's better. Got my tacking thread, and I've actually drawn a line with a friction pen 1.5 centimetres from the edge. So whatever the seam allowance is, you need to draw a line, and then you're going to tack along that line. And I like to do it by hand. I know some people do this by machine, but I just find it may take a little bit longer to go in, but it pulls out really quickly. So just tack your seam allowance along here, and then once you've done that, you're going to press your seam open. So the interfacing strip needs to be about 1 inch longer than your zip, and about 1 inch wide, and then tack along that seam. You only need to tack along the bit that's been interfaced. You don't need to all the way down. So once you've done that, you're then going to press it open here. So press your seam open, and then you're going to lay your zip onto the seam. The top of your zip here, so the zip pull should be 1.5 centimetres from the top of your fabric, and that's allowing for your facing or your waistband to go on. So don't rely on the tape at the top of the zip being the right length. Always measure from the top down. That should be 1.5 centimetres, obviously if your seam allowance is 1.5 centimetres. And then centre your zip face down. So I was just going to grab a concealed zip out of the drawer actually, because I've already stuck this one on. Just to quickly show you a concealed zip here. You'll know a concealed zip because the tag is on one side and the teeth are on the other side. So this is the right side of the zip, and it used to be that any zip that had this tag was a concealed zip. But now I've noticed that some normal zips have this tag. So just check that the teeth are on the other side. And these, you can get these in several different lengths, but they're really easy to cut to size. Just measure down the length you want and sew over the bottom, and then you can just cut the excess off. When you're buying a concealed zip, always buy it at least 1 inch longer than the gap you need. So if you've got an 8-inch gap, you need to buy a 9-inch zip, or you need to cut a 9-inch zip, because we don't sew all the way to the bottom. So once you've got your zip, you've pressed your seam open, lay the zip onto the seam, making sure it's nice and centred, and then pin and tack it to the seam allowance only on both sides. So you're not going all the way through, you're just pinning and tacking it to the seam allowance only. And again, I like to do that by hand because it comes out nice and easily. Once you've done that, take out the original tacking that's holding the seam together. And that should come out nice and easily. No, I said it will. So take out the tacking that's holding the seam together. Just cut that double stitch that I did. I always do a double stitch at the beginning and the end so that it doesn't come apart. Okay, and then you're going to open your zip. So turn it over and open the zip. So at the moment it doesn't look very invisible. You see, okay. So it's all tacked in. Now when you sew an invisible zip in, you want to stitch behind the teeth. So if you turn the zip out, you want to be standing the teeth up and stitching behind here. And to be able to do that, you need to use an invisible zip foot. This is the Janome one. I really like the Janome one because it's got the two little grooves underneath, and it's got this post on the front there which helps the teeth to stand up. So what you're going to do when it's on the machine is stand the teeth up and put the teeth of the zip in the groove on the left hand side, and then all you're doing is just slightly standing the teeth up as you're going down. Now you can do a reverse at the top here, and then you'll go all the way down as far as you can, and when you get to the bottom, just go as far as you can. When you get to the bottom here, I don't like to do a reverse here because I'm concerned about stitching back over the teeth. So if your machine does a locking stitch, you can do that. Otherwise, come off and leave long enough tails to be able to tie a knot. So I'm going to do that on the machine now. I'm going to take the zigzag foot off and put the invisible zip foot on. So I'm standing the teeth up and putting them in the groove on the left hand side here. Now sometimes, just move my tacking stitches out of the way, sometimes you get a little bit of plastic at the top of your zip, in which case you might need to ease it over a little bit. I'm going to do a reverse at the top, and then I'm just going to come down, and I'm just slightly standing the teeth up as I go down. All the way down as far as I can go. Okay, and then on this machine I can do a locking stitch.
Is that Victoria's grey linen?
Oh, I can't remember where I got this linen from. Very possibly will be. My machine does a thread cut as well, so I'm just using that. And then for the other side, you have the fabric the right way up. Fabric the right way up, or garment the right way up, and then turn the zip out. And again, stand the teeth up this side. This time they're going in the groove on the other side. I'm just going to lift the foot so it goes in the groove on the other side. Hold on to my threads for the first couple of stitches. Reverse. And then I'm just standing the teeth up as they go through. That little post on the foot really helps the teeth to stand up. Go down as far as I can, do a locking stitch. And then cut the thread. So let's have a little look and see if this is invisible. Hopefully. Look at that, nice invisible zip. So once you're happy with the nice invisible zip there, you can turn it over and take out the tacking stitches that are holding the zip on. And I'm going to show you how to finish the seam below. So let's just take out this tacking stitches. This is my, I always pin and tack an invisible zip. I mean, it's particularly good when you're doing, you've got something that's got a waist seam, you know, where you've got to try and keep the seams matching at the waist. Okay, so I've taken out my tacking stitches, and now we need to finish the seam below the zip. So this bit here. So I'm going to bring my fabrics together here. And what we want to do is start stitching where we finish stitching. So I don't know if you can see that. Amy's getting a fancy camera work here.
Well, you just stop that.
So I should have done a contrast stretch, shouldn't I, really? But that's where I finish stitching. So that's where I want to start stitching. So I'm going to put a pin in there and make sure it comes out in the right place on the other side. There. And that's just my holding pin. So now I'm just going to pin the edges together, keeping the bottom of the zip out of the way. Part of my online class as well. So when we do a zips class for the sample portfolio, I do zips and more zips. So the first zips includes this one, a trouser zip and an exposed teeth zip, and then the more zips does a lapped zip, a couture zip, so which is half on the machine and half by hand, and then a zip that's done completely by hand. So particularly good when you're working with things like Linton Tweed actually. So we want to start stitching here, and then we're going to want to stitch along our seam here. To be able to get the needle right in here, we're going to go back to using a traditional zipper foot like this one here. So most of you will have this type of zipper foot with your machine. And when you put the zipper foot on your machine, it would line up sort of like this at the edge. So what I'm going to do is move the needle over so it's level with the edge of the foot. So I'm going to do that now, put this on the machine. This is why I was saying about if you're thinking of upgrading your machine, being able to move the needle left and right is really important. So when you use these feet, always think about putting the foot on the machine so that the majority of the foot is away from the zip. So the zip is here and the big part of the foot is away from it. So I'm putting the fabric underneath, making sure the zip's out of the way and everything's nice and smooth. And if I bring this over, I don't know if you can see, but if I just went down now, the needle would be quite far away from where that pin is. So I'm going to move the needle over on this machine. 3.5 is the middle. So if I go up to 7, the needle's now all the way to the right. And now when I lower that needle, it goes right in where that pin is. So I can take this pin out. Again, double check that everything's nice and smooth. Lower the foot. Now my machine, like I said, does a locking stitch. If yours doesn't, don't do a reverse, just leave your threads and you can tie a knot later. And then you're going to come forward, whoops, and stitch your seam. Now when your foot's out to the right like this, it can feel a little bit unstable. So what I tend to do is just stitch to the end of the interfacing and then come out and then reset my machine with my normal foot to stitch the rest of the seam. So I won't do that bit now because I want to show you that this has all worked. If I turn this over now, you can see that you can't see where the zip finishes and the seam starts. So if I undo it, there we go, and that's where the zip finishes and the seam starts. So so that's the best way I find for doing that bit below the zip there. The last thing you want to do, I'm just going to turn this over again, the very last thing, let me just get some of these pins out of the way. The very last thing to do is you'll see that the bottom of this zip is not attached here. So what I like to do is to put the needle back to the middle. So I'm going back to 3.5. And I'm going to put the foot onto the other side, and I'm just going to stitch the edge of the zip tape. I'm going to start just below the top here. You really only need to do this bottom bit, but I quite like to do all the way down. Just stitch the edge of the zip tape to the seam allowance all the way down, making sure this is nice and straight at the bottom. Bad angle. To reverse the bottom, and then you can go back up the other side, and that just secures everything in place. You don't need to go all the way past the zip pull because your waistband or facing will be securing that bit. So you really only need to come to just there. There we go. And that's just all held in place now. Perfect. So that's a really nice way to do an invisible zip. It's my favourite way. It's what I always recommend and I teach in my classes. Okay, so I just wanted to show you quickly how to finish the top with a facing. When you put a facing on, this is my little piece of fabric that I'm going to use for my facing. So generally with a facing, when you're putting a facing on, you would fold the facing back so it's level with your zip here and stitch across the top. I'll just put a pin in to show you what happens when you do that.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So if you stitch across the top with it like that, then you fold that down, it gets very lumpy and you see all these bits of interface, these bits of seam allowance here. So my little tip for doing that would be, again, fold your facing like this, but then fold the zip over the top like that. Okay, so what happens when you do that? I'm just going to change my foot back and stitch that. Just going to put my normal foot back on, and I'm just going to stitch across the top so I can show you what happens when you do that. So this is why you need to be really accurate with the first bit that you do when you oh, just chucked a pin on the floor, sorry. It's fatal in this house with pins on the floor.
They are everywhere.
That's why you have to be really accurate at the beginning with making sure the top of your zip was 1.5 centimetres from the top of your facing. So go right over the top, like that. And now I'm going to trim off the corner.
Victoria's saying, can you do it with bulky fabrics too?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I'm going to cut that off there. And now when you pull this through, now what happens is the zip facing just sits nicely next to your zip like that, and all the seam allowances are tucked inside. I hope that made sense there. So what you now would do is your understitching as well, and then that would be perfectly finished. And that's my favourite way of finishing a facing on a concealed zip. You can't do that if it's lined, unfortunately, but if it's an unlined one, you can. That's a really nice way of doing it. So I hope